Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about my cornbread dressing recipe and the best turkey ever. I really wanted to get this video uploaded before Thanksgiving. I wanted to do a trial run in October, but unfortunately our new home was not ready until literally right before Thanksgiving. So I was not able to do that. So hopefully I can catch some of you who might want to use this recipe for Christmas. And then of course there's always next year for Thanksgiving, but turkey and dressing is good anytime. So this is like a Southern cornbread dressing recipe. I'm going to give you a little history of how this came about. You can of course forward through if you don't want to hear this part, but basically my mother has always been the cook in the family, and we had moved away an hour and a half from home, and they had come to our house for Thanksgiving, and I just Googled cornbread dressing recipe, and I found one that the ingredients sounded good and the way that it was made sounded good, but it was very different from my mom's and what I grew up on. The recipe that she always made, it had chicken stock in it or turkey stock. You can use turkey stock, but it was much drier, and that's what I find with a lot of dressing, is that it comes out a lot drier, so you need the gravy. This dressing, you do not need gravy, and you can actually make it a little wetter or a little drier if you choose, but honestly, I don't mess with that part of it at all. The only thing that I alter in the recipe is my amount of poultry seasoning and my sage, and salt and pepper. Salt and pepper, we do all that to taste. What we do is, I'll link the recipe below, and we taste it. We don't put the eggs in. We taste test it and keep adding seasonings as we like. But this year, for some reason, I'm not sure why, I followed the recipe exactly and it came out perfect. The salt and pepper, I believe, in the recipe is listed to taste anyway, but these two are measured out, and I actually followed that. Now, the past few times that I've made it, I've had ground sage and also Spice Island brand sage, which I personally don't like, because the last couple of times I made it at my mother's house, that's what we had, was the Spice Island brand, and it seemed like it took tons of sage. We're not big sage fans, so we used to use very little sage. I think the whole recipe calls for a teaspoon of sage. I mean, very little. So, but we literally added like half of one of these last year, or not last year, but we actually did Thanksgiving in October, because I was there on another matter, and I wasn't going to be back for Thanksgiving. So we did Thanksgiving in October. I should have filmed this then, but I didn't. But anyway, we used this, and it just took so much. So I went to the store and bought rubbed sage, and this, I don't know the difference. I just know that this came out so much better. So I used very little of this actually. And then the poultry seasoning, tablespoon. So, and it's just McCormick poultry seasoning. So, but yeah, feel free to play with the stuff, the seasonings, and do it to your taste. Also with the cornbread, when we were in Florida, we followed the standard cornbread recipe that was included with this cornbread dressing recipe, every year without fail, no problems. Last year we were here in Utah, and I used that same recipe, and it literally did not rise. It was very, of course I can't find self-rising cornmeal here either, so I don't get what that's all about, but it was very thin. It worked, but it would have been better if the cornbread would have come out better. So this year I actually Googled a high altitude cornbread recipe, and the cornbread came out amazing. You'll see in the video a little bit from here, like further, that the cornbread cooked up perfect. And my husband was, of course, like getting into it, and sampling it, and he said it was absolutely delicious. So that is the recipe I will use out here in Utah, and then I'll use the original back in Florida. So I'll list both of those. I'll call the Florida recipe, or the original recipe, the low altitude, and then I'll call the one I used here in Utah the high altitude. So that'll be the difference on that. Let me know in the comments if you try the dressing. Like I say, it was the biggest hit when we tried that back in 2000. It was either 2006 or 2007. I think it was 2006. but I could be off a year. But anyway, when we tried that, my mom and dad both went crazy over it. They said, you get to make the dressing every year. And so we've used that recipe. I pretty much make the dressing every year anyway, but sometimes she helps me do some, and then she uses that recipe now herself. Like if she makes dressing and we're not there, she uses that recipe because it was such a big hit. But what I started to say earlier about the spices is we taste it before we put the eggs in to get it to where exactly how we want it. And then we add the eggs very last. So we put all the broth in. Now, one thing about it too, it's gonna come out really soupy. Don't be afraid, because it will cook up solid. That's part of what the eggs do. They help it cook up solid. But that all the bread and crackers and cornbread and everything in the recipe is gonna soak up all that liquid. So don't be afraid, it will come out super moist. But if you put the 7 cups of chicken stock in there, it's gonna be amazing. So don't be scared of that when you see how, because that's what happened the first year that my mom and I made it. She's like, this is really, really soupy. I'm like, no, trust me, it's good. We'll be fine. Because standard dressing recipes are usually pretty, there's just a little bit of broth in there to make it a little bit moist. And then when you bake it, it dries out a lot. So that's the difference there. But it uses a lot of stock. And of course you can use your turkey stock, you know, but for the perfect turkey recipe, which I'll also link below, there's no opening the oven and no basting and no like retrieving the broth or anything. If you want to wait till your turkey's done and you're pulling it out of the oven and then get the juices out of the pan, I want to say maybe we had 2 cups of stock cook out of the turkey this year. That's just a rough guess. I'm not really sure if that's right or not, but I just use chicken stock because it's easier. I can measure it out perfectly. I don't have to worry about getting it out of the pan. So you're good to go. You can make gravy to go with this dressing, but honestly, it doesn't need it. I think maybe out of the last 12 or 13 years that we've been making this recipe, we've probably made gravy 2 or 3 times, you know, because it doesn't need it. That's my opinion. Anyway, so let me know in the comments if you try it and what you think. Also, if you have a dynamite dressing recipe, please share that as well. I would love to hear from you. Like I say, it was just a random, I just Googled. It was back in the year 2006-ish, something like that. And I just Googled it and found it. So, you know, it's nothing fancy, but oh, best ever. Okay, so I'll also include the turkey recipe if I didn't say that. I'll include all that info in the comment, in the description. But please let me know what you think. And the turkey has come out perfect 2 years in a row. We've only been doing the turkey recipe for 2 years now, both here in Utah. I wondered if part of it was the gas oven that we used last year, but this year I have an electric oven, and it cooked up just as nice in that oven as well. So I'll include all that info below and let me know what you think. It comes out absolutely gorgeous. You don't have to bag it. You don't have to do anything special to it. You got to rub it with a lot of butter, stick some butter underneath the skin. I'll include all that info, but it's super easy and it cooks up absolutely perfect. Now, one thing that may play a part is that the brand of turkey was a Norbest turkey. Last year it was frozen. We put it in the fridge 2 or 3 days ahead of time to thaw it out. This year it was not frozen, it was fresh because we literally moved in Tuesday night. I went shopping for Thanksgiving stuff on Wednesday, and then Thanksgiving was on Thursday. So it was like bam, bam, bam. I didn't have time to thaw a turkey. So anyway, so that, I don't know if the brand, I think it's one of those with no antibiotics and no hormones and this and that. Norbest is the name brand, and I'm pretty sure that's only available over here in the West. I don't really know how many places it's available. It's the first time I'd ever seen that brand, but that's the only factor that I can think may play a part, may or may not. If you do include in your comment about making this recipe, please let me know what brand of turkey you used and if it was frozen or fresh or whatever. So that way we can get a feel for maybe what all plays a part in this amazing, amazing Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas dinner, Easter dinner, whatever you want it for. Thanks for tuning in. The video is going to follow with all the good stuff. with some photos at the end. So you'll see how beautiful that turkey cooked up. Anyway, thanks for watching, and please subscribe to my channel. Thanks, bye. I also forgot to tell you about the best pumpkin pie recipe ever. It's actually a Bobby Flay recipe. You can actually Google it and find it. I will also include that in the comments. There's going to be photos of that as well. I've made that for the past 2 years, and it is absolutely amazing. And I suggest not making any shortcuts by using a store-bought pie crust, even a graham cracker store-bought. Do it from scratch, because it's not that hard to... In fact, I don't even have a food processor or anything that will crunch up my crackers and everything. I have to do it. I actually put them in a Ziploc bag, and I roll a can over it, or pound them with a can, kind of like I would use a hammer. If you have a rubber mallet in your kitchen, that'll work perfectly fine. Just keep pounding at it until you get it really good and ground up. I actually end up using a little more than what the recipe calls for. I think because my pan is actually my pie pan is a little bit bigger than what is in the recipe. So be aware that you might need a little bit more breadcrumbs and butter. I actually had put it into the pan, and then I didn't like the way it was coming up the sides. It wasn't getting up far enough up the sides. So I actually put it all back in the bowl and did some more graham cracker crumbs. Did I say breadcrumbs a while ago? If I did, I didn't mean it. But I do some more graham cracker crumbs and butter, and made the batch a little bit larger. So that worked as well. But that recipe, now I don't make the whipped cream, the bourbon maple whipped cream. It sounds amazing, but I don't have any cooking liquor here, and I don't want to buy a whole bottle of bourbon just for a little bit of whipped cream. So we just use the Ready Whip. Although probably if I try his whipped cream recipe, we'll probably never go back. But the pumpkin pie is amazing. And I would suggest the recipe actually makes enough for a pie, almost 2 pies. If your pan is small enough, you could probably get 2 pies out of it, but more like a pie and a half. So if you double the recipe, you would have enough for 3 pies easy, maybe a little bit left over. So definitely recommend that, especially if you're feeding anywhere. Like, we're a family of 3, and the pie was gone in like 3 days. So if you're feeding a larger family, definitely make 2 or 3 of them. They are so good, and you won't regret it. I'm telling you, you won't regret it. It's one of the best pumpkin pies I've ever had. Now, I will say, too, that you could shortcut by using pumpkin pie spice, but I wouldn't suggest that, because the flavors of the individual spices are so much better than pumpkin pie spice, in my opinion. You may feel differently. But let me know about the pie as well if you give that a try, but it's phenomenal. Okay, so best cornbread dressing ever. We have sauteed onions and celery, sauteed till soft with a stick of salted butter to saute with. And that looks like it's about done, so I'm going to turn that off and take it off the burner. Then we have 7 slices of oven-dried white bread. My husband got into it thinking he was going to have a piece for breakfast. Cornbread, which is, I'll link the recipe in the comments, but it's Southern-style cornbread, specifically for high altitude. I had to actually vary what I've used for the past 12 years for cornbread, because last year when we moved to Utah, it did not cook up at all. It was very, very thin and didn't rise at all. So this year I changed it to a high altitude recipe, which I will also include both recipes for those of you in both, over on the East Coast, as well as those of us over here on the West Coast. 7 cups of chicken stock, a teaspoon of sage, a tablespoon of poultry seasoning, and then salt and pepper to taste, a sleeve of saltines, and 5 raw eggs mixed together. Now the seasonings, I usually end up with all 4 of them, but especially these 2, I actually tweak based on taste. It seems to be different every single year, so we just taste it until we like the way it tastes, and that's what we go with. So we start out with what the recipe calls for, and then we continue adding. So I will do another update as this is coming together. I'm gonna make it in this pan here. I'm gonna get everything crumbled up and blended together. My vegetables are over here all ready to go. They go in with it. It's just sauteed onion and celery, if I didn't say that correctly the first time. And then the turkey's in the oven, so we will update on that later. And with just a grapeseed spray oil, and then I'm gonna blend up the cornbread, the saltines, and the 7 slices of white bread. I don't think I mentioned that it was a sleeve of saltines in the recipe as well. If I skipped that, I do apologize, but it will be in the link below. I mean, in the description below. It's up perfectly. It's delicious. It crumbles really nice. And the way I crumble it is I actually use 2 hands and I just kind of rub them together, kind of like I'm wiping my hands off from, you know, like you do if you get dirt on them or whatever, you just kind of rub them together. That's the way I crumble this. And I'm gonna crumble all this up, and I'm gonna do the same thing with the white bread. The white bread works out better if you actually dry it the day before and like kind of let it sit out uncovered. Like if you're gonna cover it, don't cover it right away or it'll sweat and get everywhere. It'll be mushy and kind of doughy. So if you can do it the day before, that's best. And what I have found, I did it on 325 today, and I did it for 5 minutes and checked it, flipped it over, did it for another 5 minutes, and then I did it for 3 more minutes, and it came out pretty darn good. But last year I did it on 275. Of course, I was in Florida, so that probably makes a difference. But I did it in Florida, and I did it on 275. I think I ended up doing it for like 35 minutes, but it came out perfectly. It literally crumbled like into sand. It was like sand bread, you know, like there was no doughy stuff at all. There was no, I had no difficulty with it or anything. I'm anxious to see how this does today. I'm hoping it works the same. I did it probably an hour ago, and it's been cooling ever since. It works best if it's completely cool. And like I said, I did it about 13 minutes total. Flipping it once after 5 minutes, and it seems to have cooked up really nice, so I'm hoping it crumbles good. If it doesn't, it's not a big deal. If it comes out kind of doughy, it doesn't matter because we're going to be wetting it anyway, so it's not really going to matter. But I get all these pieces as small as I can and combine it together. I'm also going to crush the saltines. My little tip for saltines is just I crunch them up in the bag. I do it over this container in case it busts open and leaks. But I just crunch them up really good with my hands in this container. I've also done it before in a Ziploc bag. That works well as well. Get them as small as possible, but it doesn't have to be perfect. I just like mine to be really, really like not chunky. And then later, after the turkey is done, we will add the vegetables and the stock and the eggs to it. And well, actually, I add the eggs very last. I do the all the spices, and I get it tasting exactly like I want, and then I beat the eggs and add the eggs to it. So that'll be the last step, and then combine everything together and put it in the oven. So we'll do another update later. I'm gonna work on this and get all this blended together and ready for the oven, except for the wet ingredients, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so this is what I was talking about with the saltines, just 1 sleeve of saltines, and I just kind of crunch them up. And then this one did bust open when I was doing it a little bit ago. And then I just pour them in. And then if any pieces need to be made smaller, I just do that by hand, which these look fine. And then the bread, if it comes out right, this came out perfect actually. It just kind of like almost makes sand. And you can get the kids involved with this. They have a lot of fun playing with it. Little ones would probably make a big mess. Older ones would be able to get it right in the container. But you can crunch it up and then just in your hands, like back and forth, and it kind of sands it. And it comes out perfect. And then stay tuned for the next step. We'll be back in a bit. All the bread products are in and blended, ready for the 7 cups of chicken stock. The onion, I usually end up doing a whole large onion and then a few stalks of celery. The specific recipe will be below, but we don't like celery that much, so we don't use a whole lot. But again, that's kind of just a judgment call. I don't measure it out anymore because I've been doing this so long. This dressing actually came about up here. The dressing actually came about in 2007. We moved away from our local area. We're from Plant City, Florida, and we moved to Fort Myers, and we had Thanksgiving at our house. And that was the first time we'd ever made a turkey, made the dressing, everything. And my parents came from Plant City to visit for Thanksgiving. And this dressing recipe was just a random thing I found on the internet, and I liked the way it sounded. It was different from my mom's, so I wanted to kind of experiment and step outside the box, and it was the hugest hit. And since then, that's the recipe we've used since 2007. Every year, it's been the same dressing recipe. And her dressing recipe, I know, used boiled eggs cut up, whereas this uses raw eggs, and that kind of freaked her out at first. She's like, I've never heard of that, but it actually cooks up so moist and so nice. And so this has been the best dressing recipe with our little tweaks that we do here and there with the spices and whatnot. But let me know in the comments if you try this recipe, what your thoughts are, and like how it measures up to your recipe. If you have a better recipe, please share, because I'd love to see it.